I'm Laura of Slice of Pie Quilts. In this video series, we'll be making projects for a nursery. Remember to use the hashtag MSQCKids when you post a photo. Let's get sewing with Missouri Star. I'm Laura of Slice of Pie Quilts here at Missouri Star, and I'm going to show you how to make cuffed nesting bins. Fusible foam gives it structure, and the lining also makes the cuff. Let's get sewing. To make the set of 3 nesting bins, you'll need 1 yard of exterior fabric and 1 yard for the interior. A package of fusible foam, a square ruler. I'll be using this 3.5-inch ruler for this one. A large ruler and rotary cutter, fabric scissors, marking tools, and some sewing clips. I'm going to show you how to make the large size bin, but the measurements for the small and medium sized bins will be in the description. I'm going to cut the exterior piece first. I need a 9-inch by width of fabric strip. I'm going to cut this strip into 2 9-inch by 20-inch rectangles. I cut them at the same time since it's folded. I just have to cut the 20 inches one time. Now let's cut the interior piece. Because the lining is also the cuff, the pieces will need to be a little bit bigger. I'm going to cut these 12 inches by 20 inches. Line up the fabric with the fold at the bottom closest towards you. Then cut off one end to make it straight. And then cut the 12 inches. Then turn the piece, line up the bottom edge with a line on the cutting mat, and cut the 20-inch width. We'll also need 2 rectangles of fusible foam. I'm going to cut those the same size as the exterior panel pieces, so 9 inches by 20 inches. This foam comes about 18.5 inches wide, so I'm going to cut the 2 rectangles, one 9 inches by 20 inches from the top half, and then another 9-inch by 20-inch rectangle from the bottom half. Now I have 20 inches wide, so I'm going to turn it and cut the 2 9-inch widths. Now you've cut all the pieces you need. Now we're going to fuse the fusible foam and the exterior pieces together. You want to feel the foam to make sure that you're using the correct side with the glue. So I can feel a little bit of roughness, and that's the side with the glue. The other side's really soft, so there's no glue on that side. Then place the exterior fabric right on top with the wrong side against the glue and the right side up. I use the tips of my fingers or my fingernails to scoot the fabric around so that it's lined up right with the edge. You don't want to get any of this fusible on your iron. Repeat the same thing for the other fusible foam piece and exterior piece. Follow the manufacturer's instructions for fusing the foam. Don't set this hot thing down on your cutting mat. That would be bad news. I'm going to let it cool off, and then we're going to cut out the corners. Lay the two foam pieces right sides together. We're going to cut a 3.5-inch square from the bottom of this piece. If you've used directional fabric, you want to make sure that the bottom of that directional fabric is the part that you're going to cut out. You can use any square for this, but I'm going to be using this 3.5-inch square. The other sizes require a different size square to be cut out, so be sure to look at the description if you want to make a different size. I'm just going to put the template in the corner and then use a pencil or other marking tool to trace it so that I can know exactly where to cut. I like to use scissors for this, not a rotary cutter, because we don't want to cut too far into the corner. This way, with scissors, I can get right to the corner and not go past. Now we'll do the same thing for the lining fabric. Put the two pieces right sides together. And for the large bin, we're going to cut a 3.5-inch square from the bottom two corners. Now this fabric should be non-directional because on the inside of the bin, the fabric will go one way, but when you flip over the cuff, the fabric will be going the opposite direction. So be sure to use non-directional fabric for the lining. Once you've cut the corners out of both the lining and the exterior pieces, it's time to sew. When you're working with foam, you might find these little sewing clips to be really helpful to hold the layers together. I'll add a few before we sew. We're going to be sewing on this short side here, across the bottom, and on the other short side over here. So I want to keep the clips away from those areas. Now let's sew. You can sew with anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch seam here. It doesn't really matter as long as you backstitch at the beginning and end to make sure that the stitches are secure. I'm just using the edge of the foot as a guide to know where to sew. Now, we've sewn across this short side, now we'll do across the bottom. And now, the last side. Now we'll sew the same 3 sides on the lining fabric. Now we're going to sew the corners. This is a little bit tricky, but I'm confident you can do it. Open the two pieces up from the corner like this, and line up the side and bottom seams. You can press those open if that makes it easier for you, but you want to line up those seams. Use your fingers to smooth it out. The two sides should be at an angle like this, and this corner seam should now be a straight line. So I'm going to sew it right along here with a 1/4 to 1/2 inch seam, just like I did before, making sure that I try to keep those center seams lined up. When I start stitching, I actually stitch a little bit past the angled side. Then I reverse back to the angle to make sure I stitch all the way to the edge. Now do the same thing for the other corner on the lining as well. Remember, just open up the sides, use your fingers to pull the sides apart, smooth it out. So you should have two angled sides, and this corner seam should make a straight line. Use your fingers to open up the seams. You can press them open if you'd like as well. Line up the center seams, and then sew right along that open side. Use the same seam allowance on this seam as you did before. Now the lining piece looks a lot like a nesting bin, and now we're going to do the same thing with the foam piece. This one's a little bit trickier because it's thicker. Open it up from the corner, pull the sides apart, and then make sure the center seams line up. I'm just going to finger press those open. Smash it down. The whole thing won't be, don't worry about the rest of it. Just focus on this corner seam. I've lined up the seam so it makes a straight line, and I'm going to use the same seam allowance that I did before to stitch right along this raw edge. Stitch slowly when you go over the seam. It is a lot of bulk for your machine to sew through. Now do the same thing for the other corner. Open up the corner, pull it tight, and then smash it flat. You're going to be sewing the raw edge here of this corner. I just open up the side seams, line them up, and then stitch right along this corner. You can sew it with the bottom up or with the side up. It doesn't matter. Now we have the exterior piece and the lining pieces finished. So now we're going to sew those together. Turn the lining piece right side out. Then place it inside the exterior piece. This is going to put the right sides together. Now, I use my pointer finger and my thumb and put them in there where the corner seams are at to poke out the corners, and then place those in the same two corners of the bottom of the tote. That's how I know the side seams will be lined up. Do the same for the other side. Then take the side seams, open the seams, line them up, and we're going to clip them together. Now do the same thing for the other side seam. Open the seam, line up the side seam of the interior with the side seam of the exterior, and clip. Once you have the two short sides clipped, now we're going to add some clips to the long side. To do this, I'm going to pull on the two clips that are already there until it's taut, and that will make all of the fabric line up, and then I can add some clips. So just hold it with my finger and then add a clip. Then do it again, pull it tight, and then I can add a clip there. Do the same thing for the other side. You can add as many clips as you like. I just use a few. Once you have it clipped, we're going to take it to the sewing machine and sew all the way around this top edge. You want to leave a section about 4 inches unsewn. I like to choose mine on the long side. When you take it to the sewing machine, we're going to flip it up like this and sew from the inside. The rest of the bin can go around your sewing machine, so just sew slowly. It will be fine. I'm using the edge of the foot as a guide so I know where to sew. Just sew slowly and go all the way around. As you sew, you may need to readjust the bin. I like to just keep turning it. On the small bin, you might find it easier to kind of smash the side in order to hold it. Just sew a few stitches at a time and realign it right in front of the needle as you need. When you get to a seam, go nice and slow so the sewing machine can handle the bulk. Now we're going to turn this right sides out. Just stick your hand into this spot here, grab a hold of the foam, and gently pull it through the hole. Then put your hand back in and push out all the corners. You can use your finger or maybe the eraser of a pencil if you need to. Now use your pointer finger and your thumb on the seam and push it into the corner. You want to pull up on the extra lining fabric so that the corners meet perfectly together with the corners of the exterior and the lining. Do the same on both sides. There should be about 1.5 inches of extra lining fabric sticking up on the top of the bin, and that's going to make the cuff. Once you're happy with how the lining looks inside, just turn over the cuff all the way around. Now we're going to sew all the way around the top using a matching thread. So I might use pink for this, and that will seal up this hole that we used to flip it right side out, and then you'll be done. Now we're going to sew around the top edge. I like to start on a side seam so you won't see where I start and stop. Now you know how to make cuffed nesting bins. Use the same method to make all 3 sizes. That information is in the pattern and the video description. You can use 2 fabrics like I did here, or use more so you can show off all your favorite fabrics. Be sure to use the hashtag MSQCKids when you post a photo so we can see what you make. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial from Missouri Star.
We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you are not already part of the Missouri Star Quilt family, you can hit the subscribe button below so you won't miss a thing. And if you click that bell, it'll notify you every time a new tutorial comes out. See you next Friday.